Good day and welcome to another edition of 101 with Swope Health. I'm your host, Eric Wesson, and we thank you so much for joining us today. My guest today is no stranger to Kansas City, and I say this all the time. If I ever needed an executive director for my agency, it would be this man right here, and I want to introduce everybody to none other than Bob Kendrick. He is the president and CEO of Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Oh, Eric, man, it is my absolute pleasure. It's great to catch up with you as always, and thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, so people know Bob. We're going to get to the Negro Leagues Museum and all the great work that you're doing there. But let's find out something about Bob that people didn't know about. Like you played basketball.
I did. I played basketball as a kid through high school, and that's what ultimately got me to Kansas City.
Okay.
So I left Crawfordville, Georgia,
Okay.
a town of
Population
500 people.
500.
Yeah, a town of 500 people chasing a basketball over to Park College, now Park University. And of course, today I make my living in baseball, albeit baseball history. But it's been quite the journey. I mean, Crawfordville, Georgia, as I mentioned, small rural town of 500, east of Atlanta, west of Augusta. And so it was an amazing upbringing, but, you know, I learned a lot as I got older because even as a kid growing up in the 60s, there were still remnants of segregation in those little small southern rural towns. And so there were places, Eric, that we just went through the back door because that was the way it was. You know, you didn't even question it. You know, your parents had already told you, and I tell people all the time, they teach you what we call survival skills.
Right.
You know, if you're black and you're growing up in those kinds of areas, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. And so as a kid, I don't know if I necessarily had to go through the back door, but we went through the back door. And the cook back there was always going to a little cafe. The cook was going to be black, and she made the best cheeseburger in the world. And we sat in the little old booth that were in the back that had been there when that place was really a segregated restaurant. So all that stuff kind of comes back to you as you get older because it dawns on you exactly what was going on. I told the story to my good friend Vahe Gregorian, who I know you know extremely well. Every time we left Crawfordville going to Atlanta, we would drive up old Highway 78. This is well before the interstate came through. And my mom would always cook before we took that trip. We're going to see my brother. And she would always cook before she would do that trip. So she's going to fry chicken, make potato salad. We called it light bread. Now, it's white bread, but we called it light bread. And bake a chocolate cake, a yellow cake with chocolate icing. And she would put it in this wax paper lined shoebox and pack it in that shoebox. Now, I don't know why the chicken in the shoebox seemed to always taste so doggone good. and it never dawned on me that the reason that she did that was there was no place that they could stop or they felt comfortable stopping before they got to Atlanta. And it just shows those kinds of things. But otherwise, I grew up in a very carefree environment. Like I said, I chased the basketball from Crawfordville, Georgia to Parkville, Missouri.
So what position you play? Point guard, shooting guard, power forward?
I played both guard positions.
Okay.
So point guard and shooting guard. Of course, that was before the three-point line came into effect. And so my kids would tell you, I get much better with age. Yeah, I'm much better now than I was then, at least in my eyes, because the stories get better. You know, it's like that fish that got away. You know, those fish tails, and I think that was the case. But no, man, I enjoyed it. I played for about 2 years. I broke my foot, and at that point, I was like, okay, you know what? You need to focus on studies, get the heck out of here. And I was able to get a wonderful degree, broadcast communications and journalism. So communication art with an emphasis on broadcast communications and journalism, and then made my way into the workforce. And
and you transitioned from there to
the Kansas City Star.
Kansas City Star. And then how did you transition how did you become so excited and entrenched in Negro Leagues baseball?
It's all virtually by happenstance. I
Really?
just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So when I was working at the Kansas City Star, I was senior copywriter in the Star's promotions department. And the promotions department, or the promotions group as it was called then, functioned as the Star's in-house advertising agency. And so in 1993, I drew the assignment of promoting the museum, Negro League Baseball Museum's first ever traveling exhibition, an exhibition called Discover Greatness. The exhibition is still touring the country today, 29 years later. It's in Piscataway, New Jersey right now. And that was really my first introduction to the fact that a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum existed in any capacity. And we're right down the street. You know, as you know, the Kansas Star at that time was just right down the street from where the museum had originated in that little one-room office inside the historic Lincoln Building. And I tell the story all the time. You knew the late Don Motley, who was the executive director of the museum when I got introduced to the museum project. And I'll never forget, man, walking into that office. It was a little one-room office, not much bigger than the studio that we're recording this in, and had a conference room table.
Then.
Yeah, exactly. And I walk in, and I knock on the door, and I say, I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And you know, Mr. Motley kind of stuttered a little bit. He said, boy, you're standing in it. You know, because all it was that little one-room office, conference room table, had some pictures on the wall. But little did I know that I had literally just walked into what would become my passion.
Wow.
Yeah, I absolutely fell in love with the story. And Eric, I fell in love with the athletes who made the story. I was a baseball fan. And all of a sudden, I'm being introduced to a chapter of baseball in American history I knew absolutely nothing about. Now, I knew the names Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, Josh Gibson. Those are transcending names. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Now, you may not know how great they were, but you at least likely have heard those names. But, man, I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. And I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way I felt about it. And then I started to meet the players. And, of course, one particular player, our friend, the late, great Buck O'Neil. And as I've oftentimes said, man, once you're bitten by the buck bug, it's a wrap. There's no antidote. There's no antidote. You know, you just wanted to be on Buck's team, the passion, the drive, the energy that he had for wanting to make sure that their story was not forgotten. And I just wanted to be a part of it. I never saw it turning into a career. And I think one of the most gratifying things I could have ever done personally or professionally. And so I've been really blessed to do this work.
You know, and when I watch you and the enthusiasm and the stories that you tell, you've like ate, drank, and slept Negro Leagues baseball. I've known you for 20 years because I've been at the call for 20 years. So you've like ate, drank, and slept it. And so is there anybody on earth that knows more about Negro Leagues baseball than you?
No, I think there are a number of guys. Because, you know, what I like to remind people, because people say, oh, he's a historian. No, I'm not. I'm not. My history teacher would probably roll over in his grave for anybody that ever coined me a historian. And it would be doing a disservice to those who have dedicated their entire lives to researching and doing this kind of thing. What I've been, I think, astute enough to do and blessed and fortunate enough to be in the presence of so many of those former players is to be able to articulate the story in ways that people really can be engaged by. And I don't even know where that came from. Some of it maybe innateness, you know, being around Buck O'Neil, who I think is the greatest baseball storyteller of all time. You know, and the thing that I learned from Buck, Eric, was that I don't care how many times he had told the story, if he was telling it to you for the first time, he's going to tell it to you as if it was the first time he ever told that story. And again, in my role, in my world, coming from a marketing PR background, you understand that you're selling. This is all about selling. I can't sell it if I don't believe in it. Now, some people are master salesmen. They can sell you anything. That's not me. I've got to believe in it. Even when I was in college, and one summer I worked selling door-to-door vacuum cleaners. But I believe that the Filter Queen was the best vacuum cleaner on the market.
And you, okay,
And
okay,
so I can't sell it if I don't believe in it. So I wanted to learn as much as I could because I wanted to be knowledgeable about what I'm talking about. And when I really started working for the museum, it became even more important because so many people did not know this story.
right.
So now I'm
Right.
knocking on the doors of those who are potential corporate partners of ours. I've got to educate them and then help them understand why it is important to preserve this piece of baseball and Americana. And so you do. I think anything, I think maybe that's part of being an athlete is that you're constantly trying to be the best that you can be. And I wanted to learn as much about this history as I could and be able to share it in ways that hopefully people would relate to it.
And a part of that was being there with Buck,
Yeah.
traveling with him. I remember the first time I met him because I didn't know him, before. I heard of him, but I didn't actually know him until I started working at the Call. And I was like, who is the guy down the street that parks his Cadillac in the middle of the street? He don't get a ticket for that or tow it away. And I remember Donna saying, no, that's Buck O'Neal. He can do that. He said him and Miss Bluford are probably the only people that never had to have a parking space on 18th Street. And so as I met him and talked to him, he was just fascinating how he, at his age, he remembered all of those stories.
Oh, man.
And
His
he
memory
told 'em.
was amazing, particularly his long-term memory. As he was so funny. He said, well, Bob, my doctor gave me memory pills, but I forget to take them. But his long-term memory was off the charts. Everywhere we went, Eric, someone would come up to him. Said, Mr. O'Neal, do you remember my uncle? He did this with this team in 1930, 35, 39, 40, whatever the year might be. And Buck would say, yeah, I remember. And I thought, surely he's just appeasing these folks. That's Buck. That's vintage Buck. And then he'd go into something more descriptive that says, oh, yeah, he does actually remember this. And he never forgot names. See, I'm terrible at it.
Right.
I'm terrible at it. I remember
Right.
faces.
Right.
But you meet so many people that it's hard to remember names, but he never forgot names. And so if he met you for the first time, he was going to know you the very next time he saw you, and that might be 5, 10, 15 years later. And so he had a gift about him. There's no question about it. And just to hang out with that dude, man, and many car rides. I would drive him to the airport when we traveled, and the breakfasts and lunches and dinners, and then all the times on the golf course. And I tell people all the time, the smartest thing I ever did was I kept my mouth closed and I listened. Yeah, there was a lot of wisdom. There was a lot of wisdom there to be imparted if you wanted it. He didn't force it on you, but he dropped these nuggets. And I'm serious. I talk to Buck almost every single day. Now, he doesn't always talk back to me.
Right.
But I talk to Buck almost every day because, again, I feel like he's been kind of watching over me.
Real.
That he's been guiding my footsteps throughout this time that I came back to become president of the museum.
You're listening to One-on-One with Swope Health. I'm your host, Eric Wesson. My guest today is Bob Kendrick. He is the president and CEO of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Great guy. When I grew up, I want to be just like him. So now you're getting ready to do something really special in July. And something that people have been waiting for years, for a century almost, for it to happen.
It's amazing to think that at long last, Buck O'Neal is going to take his rightful place in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, granted, it is 16 years after he passed away. And, of course, we remember that he missed by one vote from getting in 2006. And subsequently, he passed away later that year. And it's bittersweet from that respect. I wish that my friend was here so that we could celebrate with him.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to high five, chest bump, hug our guy. We won't get the opportunity to do that. But as I've expressed to you, before, it doesn't diminish the accomplishment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he deserves to be there. And it doesn't lessen the impact that this could have on his museum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've got to do now. We've got to parlay this opportunity into a financial windfall for his museum. That's exactly what he would want us to do. Had he gotten in 2006, he wanted to use his induction to raise much needed support and awareness for his museum. And albeit 16 years later, we have an opportunity to do just that. And it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So we have to capitalize. We have to. But man, I've been smiling ever since Sunday, December 5th, about 5:45 Central Standard Time, when Josh Rawitch, who is the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, started to read the bio, and we knew that it was Buck. And we had nearly 300 people who had gathered at the museum. We're on the Field of Legends, all of us nervous, waiting to see what the verdict was going to be. Because, I had put myself through this in 2006. So
Right.
I now know how painful this whole process can be and how challenging a secret ballot can be.
Right.
Secret ballots are never good.
Right.
They really aren't. They really
Right.
aren't. Because, what you do is people say everything that they think they're supposed to say when you're having the discussion, and then the minute they get under the hood, they do something totally different. Because no one wants to be
Right.
the one that's signaled out.
Right.
The guy, whoever didn't vote for Buck the last time, they didn't want anybody to know they didn't vote for Buck. But my thing is, if you didn't think Buck was good enough to be in, that's fine. I don't agree with you. But you certainly have that right. But tell us why.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us why. Don't hide behind a process. And so here we go all over again. Got to go through this process. I'm a nervous wreck, man. But when he made the announcement, started reading the bio, we all knew. And the room erupted. Yeah, it erupted. And it was very emotional for me, because I reflected on how painful it was when I had to tell him in 2006 that he didn't get in. And I know
Right.
in his heart he thought he was in. And I had to tell him that he didn't get in. And you reflect on that and how challenging that was. But who handled it better than anyone? Buck.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
It's like it didn't even faze him.
Like it did. No, and I still get mad today. I tell people all the time, I'm trying, y'all. I am. I'm trying to be more Buck-like. I'm not there yet. I'm still a work in progress. So I was feeling that. And then just the sheer emotion of being excited that it was finally happening. Better late than never. And so it was very emotional. So I kind of exhaled, and then the tears started to flow, and then we had a champagne toast. I don't even drink, but I told my staff that if Buck got in, I was going to have a glass of champagne, and I'll be honest, it was the sweetest champagne I've ever had. So it was very special. We're looking forward to going to Cooperstown in July for the official induction.
So what'll come back to the museum? Do they get a jacket for
There's
that?
some things that we still have to figure out how much will actually come back. I hope it all does. Obviously, we have to work with his family. He still has some family, and so we'll have to work with his family. But, how special would it be to have that Buck O'Neil Hall of Fame stuff to be there at the museum and or the future Buck O'Neil Education and Research Center, which we're working there at the site of the old Paseo YMCA. And of course, once we get back from Cooperstown in July, we'll set wheels in motion for a major Buck O'Neil Hall of Fame gala for later in Saturday, November the 12th, as a matter of fact, at the Midland Theater. So black tie event. We're going to give you a reason to dress up. You don't need a reason. You're always sharp. But we're going to give other people a reason to dress up and look pretty, as Buck would say, as we celebrate. I think the closure of his baseball legacy. This now closes his baseball legacy. Now, his legacy is far bigger than the game of baseball. But this does. It brings closure to it, and it is absolutely going to be cause for celebration.
So in addition to that, you were talking about moving into the education center or putting some of the memorabilia. So what's the future of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum?
We got some grandiose future now. You know, I got as late Don Motley would say, I got $1 million ideas and a 10-cent billfold. But you have to dream.
Right.
You have to dream.
Right.
And our organization is in a position now where we can dream and dream out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some very ambitious plans on the horizon for our museum, including, obviously, the completion of the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. And for those who may be listening, this is going to be housed at the former Paseo YMCA. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the Paseo YMCA is the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. That's
right.
where the leagues were formed February 13th, 1920. And that building had been abandoned. It had become an eyesore there. As a matter of fact, it was the only blighted building really on the Paseo. The Paseo is a majestic boulevard.
Right.
And this was the only eyesore, and thanks to the leadership of our friend, the barbecue baron, Ollie Gates, who took it upon himself that he was going to help save that landmark in memory of his friend. Mm-hmm. And we started this process, and the late Landon Rowland, the philanthropist, donated that building. He bought that building from Land Clearance and donated it back to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum so that we would have a secondary place to run our operations. And so now we've got the wheels fully in motion again. You know, we had the tragedy of the flooding of the building way back in 2018, and that has delayed the project pretty significantly. But it's like anything else now. You have to pick yourself up. You can't just sit there and continue to lick your wounds. So it happened. It is what it is. And now we're moving forward. Hopefully by later this year, those areas that had been so just drastically damaged will be restored, and we'll be able to do some events in that space, and then we'll continue the process. And my goal is by 2023, November 2023, to have the Buck O'Neill Center completed, fully functioning, and then that times perfectly with a new airport, and then following that, a new Buck O'Neill Bridge. So, you know, this is an exciting opportunity for us to do and to dream, like I said, to dream out loud.
And so, and eventually, as you exit and retire and pass the torch on, do you see like a bigger museum for Negro Leagues baseball?
Yeah, I do.
There,
I do.
Because it kind of seems like you're outgrowing where you are.
No, you're absolutely right. We've outgrown our current home, and so we need to be thinking about expansion of our museum. And of course, we are fully committed to historic 18th and Vine. Yeah, we don't want to see this museum move anywhere else, but we know that we've tapped out of space. We really have. If we were to acquire a substantial collection today, we'd have no place to display it. Every time I get ready to tell a new story, I have to literally tear something up and build it within the restraints of those 10,000 square feet. Now, when you went from a one-room office to 10,000 square feet, it seemed like a lot of space. We moving on up, moving on up to the east side. But after being there for as long as we have and seeing the enormous growth of this institution and the heightened interest in it, we now realize that we don't have nearly enough space. So we've got some issues along those lines from an infrastructure growth standpoint that we're certainly going to have to address. And we've started talking about that internally with my board, and I think we hear, hopefully pretty soon, you'll hear some pretty exciting news about some of those plans.
So when your collection grows, that's donations that people have that they make to you?
The more majority of them are.
Really?
Yeah, the more majority. I'd say even today, 95% of the items that you see on display at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, they were donated. They were donated by the players and or their families. It has only been over the last, I would say, Eric, last decade that we've started to try and actively compete for memorabilia. I tell people all the time, we've become our own worst enemy. The more we're popularizing the story, we're driving up the price of these artifacts to the point that it is so difficult for us to go get them because most of the stuff is in the hands of private collectors. They have unlimited wealth. This is what they do. They will buy it, hold on to it, and then put put it back in the marketplace, and it usually fetches 2-3 times what they paid for it. And so that's what we're competing against. And so now I already know that 3-dimensional items, balls, gloves, bats, jerseys, uniforms, we have no shot. We have no shot. So we have to be a little bit more stealth-like. So we started focusing on documents and other little things that may fly under the radar screen that we can go get, because there is no item that's insignificant to us.
Right.
Yeah, every item we bring in, there's another story to be told about it. But it would be nice to be in a position financially to compete with some of those private collectors. Now, again, you're always going to be conscious of not just spending a boatload of money on an item that makes no sense, even if it is a precious kind of item, because only so many people are going to come and take a look at it. You know, is it going to be so significant that I got to run to the Negro Leagues Museum and see that?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
You know, but we also know that those pieces should be home here in Kansas City at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
And so as we wrap up here, so the National Museum or treasure for Negro Leagues Baseball is here in Kansas City.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's something that we're really proud of. We go from a one-room office in 1990 to that 10,000 square foot exhibit that chronicles the story today. And along that journey, we became recognized as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, as deemed and designated so by the United States Congress in 2006, before Buck O'Neill passed away. I'll never forget, as we were going out to testify for this opportunity, and we're roaming the halls of Congress, and Buck actually had to do a Senate testimony. And we're eating lunch in the Senate dining room, and you know, this is highfalutin now. He country bumpkin, I'm a country bumpkin, and here we are in the Senate dining room. And I remember him ordering the famous navy bean soup that they say is supposed to be spectacular in the Senate, and all these high-powered senators were coming down to say hello to Buck. Now, Buck didn't really know who they were, and I remember now, again, Buck is the grandson of enslaved people.
Right.
And here he is now, he's in the Senate dining room, and he says to himself, Senator O'Neill, that has a nice ring to it. And then when we go do the testimony, rarely does anyone come to see these testimonies. The people who are overseeing the testimony don't really want to be there. And they just spewed into the Senate hearing room to hear Buck's testimony.
Wow.
And a year later, we got the designation, recognized now as America's National Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. There are 2 national institutions in this city. World War I and Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Wow. Now, I know we got Truman Library, but a lot of other cities have presidential libraries. That's not just you know, to Kansas City. This is something that we're really proud of. One started with a bunch of resources. The other didn't have any money. Have any money, and somehow or another we've been able to navigate the economic landscape and grow this institution from a standpoint of awareness and respect for what it is, one of the great cultural institutions in this country.
And you know, it's just remarkable to think about that. And people don't really realize that, but we're down on 18th Street, so we see people come out from all over the country going, where's the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum? Where's that at? And they're bringing their kids and you know, these hard things that we had going through the city.
Yes.
You know, I've seen, if I had a nickel for every person I've seen go by the number 25 heart there on the corner, I could probably retire. But the people are just going there taking pictures in front of that exhibit.
Yeah, no, it is beautiful to see how Negro Leagues baseball history has grown in scope and respect, and that people, you're right, people are wanting to learn this story, and more importantly, they want to share it with their families. You know, I tell people all the time, Eric, at the crux of what we do, we help, I hope, help people understand the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how those are truly pillars toward building a bridge for tolerance and respect. And it's at that latter, those two things, tolerance and respect, are still where we need to be. Because once we are able to do that, I think we can circumvent some of these things that we're seeing happening in our crazy world. And that, to me, is why I love when children walk into that museum.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we all looked at life through the eyes of a child, the innocence of a child, this world would be much better, because our children don't see color.
Right.
They just see other beautiful kids that they want to love on and play with, and then they grow into this very sullen, cynic world that says, well, if you're not this color, then you must be bad, and you don't, all these things that we seem to taint people with. And here's this incredible story of these courageous athletes who just simply refused to accept the notion that they were unfit to play this game.
Right.
Yeah, you won't let me play with you? Okay, I'll create my own. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'll create my own. And as I tell my guests, there's something very American about that spirit. So yeah, America tried to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, but the American spirit allowed them to persevere and prevail. And so our guests leave literally cheering the power of the human spirit to do so. And that's a little bit different story than most of our stories, particularly our stories that are ingrained in our struggles for civil rights in this country. They're very sad and is filled with hardship. Not the story of the Negro Leagues. Not the story of the Negro Leagues. It is triumph over the adversity. Yeah, you've seen me sprayed by water hoses. You've seen the police dogs released on me. The police brutality that still manifests itself to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that is the only image that you have of me, man, there's no commonality there. You can't relate to that. There's very few folks that can relate to those kinds of struggles. But oh, my success stories. You can absolutely relate to my success stories. And the Negro Leagues and the story of the Negro Leagues is one of those great American success stories. So you need to see that side of my journey as well.
Right.
Yeah, my life hadn't all been downtrodden. It's all, so we need a balance. And once you can relate to my success stories, now we find commonality. And that's kind of how we've approached this at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
And that dream and vision is kept alive by you and the great work that you're doing there. Bob, thanks so much for joining us. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in, watching this issue, One-on-One with Swope Health. And I'm your host, Eric Wesson. And Jaron Raven, thanks so much for the vision to put this program together. And I want to let everybody know that Swope has served over 40,000 people in 2021, and we look forward to serving you as well. Until next week, peace.